The injunction, "Don't speak ill of the dead," does not apply to the class enemy. Brother Malcolm pointed out the difference between the privileged house Negroes during the slavery era and the proletarian field Negroes who had nothing to lose when the master fell upon misfortune. The field Negroes were always happy and ecstatic when the master got sick, his property caught fire, or he died. Their relationship was purely antagonistic, you see. The only goals of an enslaved person are to ensure that their master suffers as much harm as humanly possible and to secure their freedom. The most backwards of house Negroes, on the other hand, had the still antagonistic relationship between master and slave obscured by the fact that their standard of living was higher than that of the proletarians in the field. The house Negroes got to wear the master's cast-off clothing, which was always of higher quality than the proletarians' homespun rags. The house Negroes got to eat the leftovers and the crumbs from the master's table, instead of the cornmeal mush and the fatback that proletarians subsisted on. And they got to sleep at the foot of the master's bed, while the proletarian field slave got to sleep in chains in barracks or in log huts behind the house. Malcolm uncovered the class contradictions within the new African nation that still exists today. Now, we can expand these categories to encompass the revolutionary and progressive movement as a whole. There are field activists and proletarian revolutionaries, and there are also NGO house activists. These are your blue-check Twitter people. Your Alicia Garzas, your DeRay McKessons, those types of people. There's rioters and looters, and there's peace police. There's paper panthers, peaceful panthers, and there are real panthers. The response to the recent death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a good line of demarcation, as is the relationship to the bourgeois system as a whole. You see, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was an enemy of the people. This is apparent in her rulings and decisions from the bench, along with instances where she made her views known on the major issues of the day. She called progressive athletes such as Colin Kaepernick arrogant and stupid. She cited the colonial doctrine of discovery, which was developed explicitly to justify European mercantile powers such as England, Portugal, and France stealing land from indigenous people across the world, in a case where she ruled with the majority in denying a land claim by the Oneida Iroquois people. She has also expressed eugenicist views and handed the Trump administration, which she pretended to oppose, a victory over undocumented immigrants a few months before her demise. The fact that there is a cult of personality around this open and unabashed enemy of the people is due to the banal identity politics of white women. Liberal feminists who simply care about more representation in the halls of oppression and exploitation than liberation for the toiling masses of people around the world, a growing majority of which are women. These liberal feminists care more about female CEOs at Boeing and the right of women to serve in various branches of the fascist American military than the fact that these things harm proletarian women around the world. They refuse to acknowledge the Marxist truth expressed by the popular women's movement of Peru that women, like men, are reactionaries, centrists, or revolutionaries. They cannot, therefore, all fight the same battle side by side. In today's human panorama, class differentiates the individual more than sex, end quote. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is firmly in the reactionary category. The failure to seek class at the root leads to more and more impotence, political weakness, and defeat. Liberal circles are, of course, engaged in their regular "the sky is going to fall" rhetoric around the death of Ginsburg. They are currently engaging in pitiful alarmism regarding the necessity to convince class enemies in the Senate of the necessity of holding Ginsburg's seat open for Biden to fill, if he gets elected in November. They are also engaging in alarmism around the possible overturning of Roe v. Wade decision and other concessions that did not come from the good graces of one or two stodgy old white men on the Nixon-era Supreme Court, but from sharpening contradictions of the time that led to these concessions being extracted by force. Rights are not decided by judges. Our liberals need to study more history to learn where rights came from. Your rights come from millions of people with weapons in hand. The institutions you praise were wrested from British feudalists by force, by the American bourgeoisie and the slaveholder class in the 18th century. These institutions were set up in their image to represent their interests and serve their purpose. Proletarian New African people are not wringing their hands at the demise of Ginsburg or any other bourgeois administrator because we never had any rights that this country respects. This was established by Justice Taney in the Scott v. Sanford decision. What few rights we do have were wrested through the Civil War and the threat of violence in urban areas. Every inch of our rights is soaked in blood. The Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts were signed not because the racist LBJ and JFK administrations gave a shit about black people, but because we were fully prepared, and still are, mind you, to destroy this country. Violence, or the fear and credible threat of violence, is what drives human progress. RBG is simply another fascist footnote that stepped on the people's hands, hearts, and heads in the service of bourgeois law and order. No tears are being shed for her New African households this weekend. As Tupac said, "We'll cry for those who cried when we buried Malcolm." Cast away illusions. Embrace struggle. It's later than you think. I'd like to close by offering solidarity to the comrades of the Party for Socialism and Liberation who were arbitrarily and unjustly arrested by state forces after leading the response to the murder of Elijah McClain. Even though I am not a member of this party and have criticized them in the past, the principle of touch one, touch all applies even to those with whom we strongly disagree. The repression of progressive activists is just another example of the necessity to build strong bases of support in the people and prepare even more thoroughly for the days to come. I encourage viewers to donate to the Legal Defense Fund for the arrested organizers and sign the petition demanding their release. Both links are in the description of this video. I'm Black Red Guard.